Okay, so I found this site and I thought it was really fascinating because what it does is it might just boil down what country you choose to live in based on 6 simple different factors. So let's take a look at that today here on Valley of the Dolly. So there is a group called the Hofstede Group, and they have developed a study. And in this study, they look at all of the major countries, and they boiled it down to 6 different cultural markers that they feel kind of define each different country. And they're always in a range, so there's never, too much of an extreme one way or the other. But there are dramatic shifts between where one country might stand and another country might stand. And this may allow you to look at your own personality and say, yeah, I'm a really good fit for this country. No, I'm not a really good fit for this other country. Or you may wonder why you're not really a good fit for the country you're currently living in right now. So let's take a look at that. So the Hofstede Group picked 6 different markers. And the first one is called power distance. So in power distance, they're talking about if you have a job, right? Is your employer or your boss here? Are you here? Does the boss make all of the major decisions without informing you or having a consultation? Or do you live in a culture where there's a lot of back and forth, give and take, and there's a lot of information that's exchanged? Sometimes in a more formal culture, there's not a lot of information exchanged, and things are done without consulting the worker. So that's what we talk about when we talk about power distance. So a high number in power distance really reflects much more of an authority-driven work situation. The next one is individualism. And this is really the difference between the I and the we. So some countries are very driven by the I, which means that a high score would be something where they focus on their immediate family or on themselves, and they take less interest or focus on what a low score would reflect, which is the we. So on a low score, that culture would be much more focused on not just the immediate family, but the extended family and our local society as a whole. So you do not only look at what's good for you, but you look at what's good for your society as well. And you strive to make things better across the board and not just for yourself. So that's kind of the difference between an individualism score that's high and low. And again, these things, it's not necessarily good or bad. That's something I'll leave you to interpret. But what it really is pointing out is that there are dramatic differences between what you might see or feels relevant and what somebody else might see. So the next one is masculinity versus, and this I thought was fascinating because they use it as a masculinity scale, right? So you have 100% masculine, or it goes down as masculinity recedes and it becomes feminine. But it's called a masculinity scale, so it doesn't even really acknowledge the feminine side. It's not masculine versus feminine, it's just the masculinity scale. So in this, what we're talking about, a very masculine country would be a country where the people are really winner takes all, competition is vital, and that's not true just for your work, but it's also true for your leisure and your sports activities. It's very important that you come in first. And you even see that sometimes in the United States. You might see Consumer Reports or somebody list 2 items and there's 1 point difference. So basically they're the same, but people only take that one with the slightly higher score because they feel that there must be something dramatically better about the one product that has basically the same score, but it's just 1 point higher. And the much more feminine country, instead of having a live to work mentality, which is typical among a masculine culture, a more feminine culture will have more of a work to live mentality. And in that, we're talking about the idea that you would go to work is important, but you're not working at that as solely as your identity. What you're doing is working so that you can create a life for yourself. So those are very different things to compare yourself against, right? The other thing, another factor is uncertainty avoidance. And that may seem kind of like an odd one, but it does really make a lot of sense. If you are looking at uncertainty avoidance, we know that the future is uncertain. But the question is, how does that culture deal with an uncertain future? Do you have really strict codes inside of the country and ways of looking at things that are very unbending? So in the face of uncertainty, do you rely on those things to hold the population and the country together? And that innovation might be bad. And what's really important is that somebody shows up for work, that they're punctual. You may try the same thing over and over again, even if it doesn't work, but that's better than trying something that is unknown to fix an uncertain situation. Whereas if you have a low score with this, it means you're much more open to innovation. You're looking for ways, constantly accepting that there is a level of uncertainty, and we need to look at innovation and other opportunities as possible solutions. You could still be leery of them. You might still have, concerns about them, but you're more likely to say, yeah, I agree. Let's take a chance on this. Let's see if it works. You're not just going to go back and rely on something that you've always done. The next one is long-term orientation. So in this one, looking at the high score again is long-term orientation. Are you sticking to your country's norms? Do you view change with suspicion? In a low score, you're willing and trying to accept new ideas and new innovations. And indulgence is probably pretty easy for most of us to figure out. We've all had moments of indulgence. But the question is the culture itself really indulgent, or are they more restrictive? Do you find that the country is indulgent, where people are openly talking about their achievements and they focus on being indulgent of themselves when it comes to items and watches and clothes? Are they indulgent when they talk about their successes? Or are they restrictive? Does the culture frown on people talking about all their successes and putting themselves first? So again, with these things, there's not necessarily a single solution, but I decided to look at 4 different countries. And these 4 countries are Vietnam, Portugal, the United States, and Germany. So 2 of them are in Europe, 1 is in Asia, and 1 is in the Americas. So it's not 4 is really the max that they'll allow you to look at in this particular survey. And the reason that I chose those 4 are because you find that the numbers are significantly different between the 4. So when you look at something like power distance, you find that countries like Vietnam tend to be very high in that, along with Germany. And to some degree, those 2 countries tend to be very high in that. So there tends to be a much stronger degree of separation in Portugal and Vietnam between the boss and the employee. And then when you get to a country like Germany or the United States, there tends to be a much lower hurdle or division between the worker and the boss, a lot more listening to each other and coming to conclusions together. And that's a very different situation. When you talk about individualism, we know the United States, very important individualism. The focus is on you or you and your immediate family, not on the extended family or your city at large. And you find that that's very different when you talk about Portugal again, or Vietnam, which are much more focused on your extended family, on your community, and that even affects your work. You may have very close or preferential ties with certain people at work in that group, but you view things differently than you would in cultures like Germany or the United States, which are much more individual focused, where the focus is really on self-achievement, and pushing yourself as far as you can. And with masculinity, again, you see here in Germany and in the United States, a focus much higher on the masculine side of the scale. And this, again, goes back to that desire for competition as opposed to the more feminine, community-driven focuses that you have in a culture like Portugal and a little bit to a lesser degree in Vietnam, which becomes at 40 closer to kind of the middle ground on the masculinity scale. And when it comes to uncertainty avoidance, this one I thought was fascinating, because in a country like Portugal, there's a very, very high, 99 out of 100, focus on uncertainty avoidance, which would be the focus on using current tools or using processes the way we currently have and shying away from the unknown or innovations that are considered risky or unknown at that point. Whereas if you get to countries like Vietnam or the United States, they are much lower on that scale. And as a matter of fact, Vietnam is the lowest of those 4 on there for uncertainty avoidance. So looking for new answers, innovations, etc., is much more of a focus in a country like Vietnam than in a country like Portugal, for example. Long-term orientation, focus on the long term. You see Germany and Vietnam are both much higher when it comes to those attributes. And I know that partly also is looking at, are we looking in the long term? And you see in the US a focus with businesses on short term. What is your profit in the next quarter? What are your results for this year? They're not looking 10, 20 years down the road. They need to report immediately on a short-term focus. And you see in a lot of different ways in the culture where there may be a very intense look at the short term and less of a focus on what things will be like in the long term. Because I think also those things that are in the long term are much harder to understand or focus. And you really have to stop and think, if you're looking in the longer term, it's a completely different mindset. You need to stop and think, if you're at a company, where do I want that company to be in 20 years, as opposed to where do I expect it to be in 1 to 5, and how will that affect the stock that people bought in that company? And then when it comes to indulgence, America only rated 68 out of 100, which kind of surprised me. But all 3 of the other countries were significantly lower, where they were more restrained in the level of indulgence. And so it was viewed with more skepticism, I think, about how much you should display talking about yourself, or display that wealth, or display indulgences for yourself personally, or for your family. So I really thought this was a really interesting study from the Hofstede Insights Group. And I wonder what your thoughts on this, or if you looked up other countries and you wanted to share some of the results that you found, just to see if you feel that it's in line with what you believe the attributes are for your own country, and if it reflects maybe a difference in where you might choose to live if you have a choice of moving. So again, this is Ted at Valley of the Dolly. Thanks for subscribing if you have, and hit the like bell, or hit the like button. And I look forward to talking with you again soon. Thanks.